Hello, my holy brothers and sisters. How are you doing today? We are going to be doing a double daf today, a double page. We are in Tractate Shabbos, chapter 3, and today we're going to do key points from pages 44 and 45. So we're going to get right into it, but tonight is the beginning of Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel. This is Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day. There's another one called International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is very important in the world, but Yom HaShoah is a little bit more meaningful to the Jewish people themselves. And so this is the day set aside in Israel and among the children of Israel everywhere to remember those who were lost in the Holocaust. This is my grandfather. His name was Imre. Imre is a Hungarian name. He's from the town of Kartsag, Hungary. And I never met him, and my mother never met him. Because he was taken away while my grandmother Magda was pregnant with my mother, and so their only child, my mother Kati, was born after he was taken away by the Nazis, and he ended up perishing in the concentration camp called Dachau. So today, as Yom HaShoah is coming in tonight, I would like to remember my grandfather Imre, and I'm going to light this memorial candle for him. May his memory always be for a blessing. And I'd like to dedicate today's learning to my grandfather. May this learning be a joy to his soul in heaven. May his neshama have a great aliyah. May his neshama in heaven, his soul in heaven, rise higher in the merit of the learning that we're going to be doing together today. And let us say Amen. So let me just put that aside here. Okay. All right. So we're in chapter 3 of Tractate Shabbos, the second tractate of the Talmud. Chapter 3 is mostly about cooking, restrictions on cooking, on Shabbat and holidays, about insulating food, etc. But now we're in a bit of a digression from what this chapter is normally about. And yesterday we started talking about the concept of Muktzeh. Muktzeh meaning set aside. So the rabbis created a restriction, a decree, and a sort of body of law around it that objects which have no use on Shabbat, for example, money. You can't spend money on Shabbat, so since it has no legitimate use on Shabbat, you don't even touch it, right? You don't even touch money because it is not prepared for Shabbos. It has no legitimate use on Shabbos, so it's not prepared for Shabbos. That kind of case, money, a hammer, that's easy, right? But there's other things that are going to be less obvious, and we're continuing to look at how this law of Muktzeh works. And particularly, we're going to look at the difference between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda were contemporaries who disagreed on a few things, particularly relating to Shabbat. The primary disagreement that we know them for is that if you do a permitted action like moving a chair on Shabbat, but in moving it you create a furrow in the dirt floor of the house, right? In Talmudic times they often had dirt floors. So creating a furrow, that's actually a prohibited labor on Shabbat because it's like farming, right? It's like, you create furrows and then later you come along and plant seeds in them. Obviously, you're not going to do that in the dirt floor of your house, but digging a hole or digging a furrow in dirt is a prohibited labor. Now, if that comes about as a result of moving the chair, you didn't move the chair in order to create a furrow, but the furrow was created. So are you liable to bring a sin offering for creating the furrow? Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, because moving the chair created that furrow. And if you knew that there was a chance the furrow was going to be created, you shouldn't have moved the chair. Rabbi Shimon says, no, you're exempt from being a sin offering unless it was inevitable that you would create a furrow. If there was any chance that you weren't going to create the furrow, then you're not going to be liable for doing this prohibited labor that you didn't intend to do. So that's kind of one of the main conflicts between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. But now we're learning that they also differed on the concept of Muktzeh. Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, there's Muktzeh. You don't touch things that have no legitimate use on Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon did not hold by Muktzeh. So because they had this dispute, I've already sort of given away the ending, there is a concept of Muktzeh now. So ultimately Rabbi Yehuda's opinion prevailed in this. But during the times of the Talmud, this dispute was actually quite unsettled, right? And so even though we ended up holding by Rabbi Shimon with regard to the unintended violation of a Shabbat prohibition, we came out holding by Rabbi Yehuda in terms of Muktzeh. But now we're going to look at some cases that come up in the Talmud and we start to figure, well, why did we end up holding like Rabbi Yehuda? Why did the rabbis end up holding like Rabbi Yehuda in terms of Muktzeh? So the Mishnah, we're going to be doing Mishnah number 8 of chapter 3. This is found, it's actually just before page 44, I think. Let me see, is it on 44 or just before 4? No, it's on page 44, on page 44a. So in the Mishnah, we have the issue of moving an oil lamp on Shabbat. Now, all agree that an oil lamp which is lit, right, before Shabbos, and we light it to be the Shabbos lamp. Why do we light a Shabbos lamp? So we're not sitting in the dark on Shabbos. Why do we want to sit in the dark on Shabbos? Because then we couldn't enjoy Shabbos. Shabbos wouldn't be beautiful and holy if we were sitting in our rooms in the dark. So we got to have light during Shabbos, but we can't kindle a fire, which is a prohibited labor according to the Torah. Not just the rabbis, but the Torah says no kindling a fire on Shabbos. So that's why we light the Shabbos lights before Shabbos starts, right? We light it at the end of Friday while it's still Friday day, and then we've got that light for as many hours as it will last during Shabbos. Candles burn down relatively quickly, but an oil lamp could burn all through Shabbos, just depending on the size of the lamp. So all agree that a light which is lit on Shabbos, right? It was lit before Shabbos started, and as long as it lasts on Shabbos, while that lamp is burning, you can't move that lamp. Why? For one thing, for sure, you can't move it because you might come to extinguish it, right? Move, a candle flame, a lamp, an oil light, it's a delicate thing. You might come to extinguish it, so we don't move the lamp on Shabbos. What about an oil lamp that is not lit, right? You have some other oil lamp, and you didn't light it, right? This is the oil lamp that you're not using on Shabbos. Can we move that lamp? Is it Muktzeh on Shabbos? That's the question. Now, here we introduce a new idea. Some say, right, so we may move, the Mishnah says we may move a new oil lamp, but not an old oil lamp. Now, neither one is lit. If it was lit, for sure we couldn't move it. This is an unlit lamp. Why can we move a new oil lamp, but not an old oil lamp? Answer, because the old oil lamp would necessarily, or likely, let's say, be covered in soot, right? And if you touched it, you'd get soot on your hands. So there's an assumption, and here we're going to see that so much of the law of Muktzeh has to do with intention, reasonable intention. So we have a reasonable expectation that people would not want to touch something that is disgusting or repulsive. Now, it doesn't sound to us like an oil lamp with some soot is so disgusting or repulsive. It's not like a chamber pot, right? Where people used to, go to the bathroom in houses where there was no indoor plumbing, they had a chamber pot. That's repulsive. You don't move that on Shabbos. You wouldn't want to touch that. But the old oil lamp would have a buildup of soot, so much so that if you touch it, you get like black, oily grease on your hands, so you wouldn't want to touch that. So since it is normally thought of as a repulsive object, nobody would have in mind before Shabbos began that there was going to be a reason to use that oil lamp or to move that oil lamp, right? To have some other purpose for it other than lighting it and using it for light. There's no other reason that you'd use an old sooty oil lamp during Shabbos, so it becomes Muktzeh and you can't move it all through Shabbos. A new oil lamp has no soot. So you might have had in mind that even though you weren't going to light it, you were going to use it as a bowl for fruit, or you were going to use it as a weight, right? So some napkins wouldn't blow away in a breeze. There might be some permitted use for that oil lamp, even though you didn't specifically have that designation in mind. You might have had, it would be reasonable to have such a designation for that new oil lamp, and so it is not Muktzeh, and it's permitted to move it during Shabbos. Okay. Like I said, all agree that if it was lit during Shabbos, you can't move it. What about the lamp that was lit on Shabbos, right? So you lit it, and then eventually it ran out of oil and went out. Can you move it after it's gone out? Per Rabbi Shimon, yes. Yes, because he doesn't hold by Muktzeh. It's no longer lit, so there's no danger that you would come to extinguish it. So why not? You could move it. But per everybody else, no, because you had in mind the oil lamp for Shabbos to use it as the light for Shabbos and not for anything else, right? So you can't move the light when it's lit, and even after it goes out, you still can't move it. Now, Rabbi Meir says one may move any lamp except one that was kindled. So he agrees that there's Muktzeh. He agrees that a lamp that was lit cannot be moved even after it has gone out. But an old oil lamp that was never lit can be moved according to Rabbi Meir. So now we know that Rabbi Meir doesn't hold by Muktzeh due to repulsiveness, right? He thinks something that just because it's dirty and most people wouldn't want to touch it, that doesn't, for Rabbi Meir, that doesn't make it Muktzeh. That's Rabbi Meir. He doesn't hold by disgusting Muktzeh, but he does hold by the Muktzeh for the prohibition on the lamp. The lamp was set aside to be used for Shabbos light only, right? So even one that was lit after it goes out, Rabbi Meir would agree that you can't move that. What about a candlestick? Right now we're getting closer to the modern world where we don't use oil lamps so much, but we certainly light Shabbos candles, and we have them in candlesticks. So a candlestick, right? We lit candles in a candlestick. You can imagine some people have fancy candlesticks. My grandmother used to. Her Shabbos candlestick had 3 cups coming out of it, right? It was like a nice little silver tower with one in the middle and 2 more out the sides. You could call that a candlestick or perhaps a candelabra, right? But the point is, you lit candles in it. All agree, while the candles are burning, you can't move the candlestick. What about after the candles go out? It is okay to move a candlestick in terms of repugnance, right? Even a candlestick that wasn't lit on this Shabbos, we don't worry about it like an old oil lamp because candlesticks don't become all sooty. So there's no issue that the candlestick would become repugnant and you wouldn't have moved it because you were afraid that your fingers would become dirty. So that's not an issue. Okay, so can we move the candlestick? Another possible objection to moving the candlestick is that it is a high value item. There is muktzeh related to things that are high value, right? If something is very valuable, a person wouldn't touch it except to use it for its intended purpose. You wouldn't use a very valuable, delicate candlestick as a paperweight, to make sure a napkin doesn't blow away. You wouldn't use it for anything except its intended purpose to hold candles and provide light. So there's muktzeh for things that are very valuable. They are muktzeh, right? Unless you're going to use it for something that is definitely a Shabbos purpose, we assume that you did not have in mind that you might use it for some other purpose than the valuable object's intended purpose. But we have a specific exception by Reb Zera that a candlestick that you didn't light the Shabbos light on it is not muktzeh because it's valuable. You can move a candlestick around. We didn't answer the question, a candlestick that was lit after the candle burns down, can it be moved? I'm pretty sure you cannot, but I'm not 100% sure, so you can't hold me on that one. I'm actually going to move on to a different topic. Money on a bed. This is so charming. These days, who stores money under their mattress, right? That's like a kind of old cliche, an old stereotype. I wonder if children have even heard of that. That seems to be from a bygone era. But certainly in the past, people would store money in their mattress. If you did store money in your mattress, then you turned your bed into a wallet, right? Because it was used to hold money, your bed became a kind of wallet. And while a bed is prepared for Shabbos, it is not muktzeh. We sleep on it, we can move it, whatever. It has a Shabbos purpose. People can sleep during Shabbos, so the bed has a Shabbos purpose. Nevertheless, if it was a bed that was holding money at the onset of Shabbos, then for the purposes of this particular Shabbos we're talking about, the bed has become like a wallet. And now, because the money is muktzeh and has no legitimate Shabbos purpose, the bed also becomes muktzeh. You would be able to sleep on it, but you wouldn't be able to move it, right? You wouldn't be able to move the bed. I wonder if you could even sleep on it. I'm actually not sure about that because money is something you can't even touch. But I don't think so. I think even when you put money in it, you had in mind that you would also sleep on it. So the prohibition is just moving the bed if it has money in it. Now, what about if there's no money in it, but during the week you kept money in it? You just removed the money before Shabbos. So during the week you kept money in the bed. It acted like a wallet, or even you thought about putting money in it. That means you designated it as a holder for money, even if money was not put on it. Does that mean it's going to be muktzeh for Shabbos? Some argue yes, but the halacha has come out no. As long as there wasn't money in or on the bed when Shabbat came in, the bed does not become muktzeh. If there's money on the bed when Shabbat comes in, then the bed is muktzeh until the end of Shabbos. This brings us to the interesting case of decorations in the sukkah. So a sukkah is a booth, right, that we take our meals in, and some people even sleep in it all through the fall festival of Sukkot, the 8-day holiday of Sukkot, which comes at the end of the holiday season, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot in the fall. We decorate our sukkahs often with harvest-themed decorations because it's happening in the fall at harvest time. So a nice way to decorate the sukkah is with the product of your harvest, right? Fresh fruits and vegetables that came from your orchard or your farm, and you hang them from the ceiling of the sukkah. Why? To beautify the sukkah. So there, those fruits and vegetables are performing the mitzvah of beautifying the sukkah during Sukkot. They are engaged in a mitzvah. That makes them similar to the Shabbos lamp on Shabbos, right? A lamp is a lamp, but once it's holding the Shabbos light, it's engaged as part of the mitzvah of guarding, honoring, keeping Shabbos, right? Fruits in the sukkah, decorating the roof of the sukkah, now are part of the mitzvah of Sukkot, the mitzvah of beautifying the sukkah during Sukkot. Therefore, they're muktzeh for anything other than that. They have been prepared before the holiday to be decorations in the sukkah. So can you eat them? No, you cannot. They're not prepared for eating during Sukkot, unless when you put them on the ceiling as decorations, you stipulated that after a few days, I'm going to reach up and take them down and eat them. You had the intent that they would be eaten during the holiday. So in that case, they can be decorations in the beginning, and then they can be taken down and eaten, because you did have in mind, and you stipulated that you had in mind, that you would use them for that purpose, for the both purposes. First to beautify, and then to eat. But if you didn't stipulate that you were going to eat, then it would be apparent to all that you designated those fruits and vegetables as decorations, and therefore they would not be prepared for use as food during the holiday, and they would therefore be muktzeh for that purpose. Now, Rabbi Shimon, who does not hold by muktzeh, he doesn't believe in this principle, right? Rabbi Shimon said, no, either the thing has a permitted use or it doesn't. And my intent or how I had it set up before Shabbos, it doesn't matter, So for Rabbi Shimon, there's no muktzeh, except in the very limited case of dry figs and raisins. Why dry figs and raisins out of all the possibilities that Rabbi Shimon could make an exception for? Because they have a twofold reason for not being available for use on Shabbat. Number one, you didn't just think, you didn't just say, you acted. You took an action. You put these grapes and figs aside to become dry figs and raisins, right? You put them aside and they were in the process of becoming a different kind of food. Grapes are grapes, but when you say, I'm going to make them raisins, you set them out in the sun, let's say on the roof of the house. You've embarked on a process of making the grapes into raisins or the figs into dried figs. You set them out in the sun. That's the action that you took. When you took that action, you made it very clear that those were not to be used in Shabbat. You made an action, and even on top of that, they're not edible, right? They're rotten as grapes, but they're not complete as raisins. They're not done yet, right? So because you both took an action to separate them out for use that makes them not ready for this Shabbos, and they're still in the process of becoming that thing, so then they're not available on Shabbos, and you can't go touch those dried figs and raisins. That's the only case where Rabbi Shimon holds by muktzeh. Animals prepared for use. Now, on Shabbat, obviously, you can't cook, so you can't shecht, right? You can't take a live animal, slaughter it, butcher it, and prepare it and cook it and eat it on Shabbos. It doesn't apply to Shabbos at all. But on a holiday, you can. There is cooking on a holiday. Holidays are the same as Shabbat, except that you can cook. Part of cooking is shechting the animal, right? So the question becomes, what animals are considered to be prepared for use on the holiday? Well, of course, it has to only be a kosher animal, or otherwise, an animal that's not kosher certainly could not be prepared before, right? This word prepared is jargon, right? It means that has been set aside for use on the holiday. Somebody had in mind that this object would be used in the holiday. So in the case of animals, right, if you live on a farm, okay, so any of the animals, the chickens, the goats, the sheep, right? Even a cow that you keep on the farm and that you think at some point I will slaughter that animal, cook it and eat it, right? So then you didn't have to make a specific designation that you would use this particular animal during the holiday. The fact that you live on a farm and there's animals available on the farm that you could bring in means they're prepared for use, that you could slaughter and cook them during the holiday. But if you live in a city, right, and this was very common in Talmudic times, people lived in the city for protection, but they owned fields and grazing areas outside the city. So they kept their animals in these areas outside the city. So are those animals that live outside the city prepared for use during the holiday, or are they muktzeh? Answer, if those animals ever sleep in a shed inside the city, then even though you didn't think about using them on this particular holiday, and even though they haven't slept in a shed in a long time, it still could have been possible. It was part of the possibilities that they would be used during this holiday, so they're considered prepared for use. But if they always sleep out in the fields and they never come into a shed inside the city, then they're not prepared for use on the holiday, and they are muktzeh during the holiday. So now we know that Rabbi Shimon does not hold by muktzeh, Rabbi Yehuda does. So now we start to look at, well, how did we end up like Rabbi Yehuda that there's muktzeh, since in other matters we hold like by Rabbi Shimon, right? So how is it that Rabbi Yehuda prevailed here? Well, in the next generation, there was Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, very influential rabbi. So the question was, well, does Rabbi Yochanan hold like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rabbi Shimon? So some rabbis were at a party at spending Shabbos by Rabbi Abba, right? And at Rabbi Abba's house, Rabbi Asi was present. Now, Rabbi Asi was a disciple of Rabbi Yochanan. And people observed during this Shabbos get-together that a candelabrum, okay, so some kind of large light fixture, right, like a floor-standing light fixture, that's what they mean by candelabrum. Could be like tall on a stand with a lamp on top, could be more elaborate, we're not quite sure, but it's some kind of quite significant metallic structure that you could put oil lamps or candles on it, okay? And this candelabrum fell over and landed on the cloak of Rabbi Asi. And everyone noticed that Rabbi Asi did not move his cloak for the rest of Shabbos. So it seemed like Rabbi Asi was who would do whatever Rabbi Yochanan does, right? Rabbi Asi is a disciple of Rabbi Yochanan. So since Rabbi Asi clearly seems to hold by muktzeh, it must mean that Rabbi Yochanan held by muktzeh, right? And this idea that you have just like the money on the bed, right? The candelabrum, once it fell over, right? It had moved. It had maybe, let's say it had been lit during Shabbos, and now it fell over, but it was muktzeh because, right, it had a Shabbos purpose, but it had a single Shabbos purpose to hold the light for the Shabbos. And now that it fell over, right, he's not moving the cloak, right? It's muktzeh, so now the muktzeh object, the cloak was not muktzeh, but now that the muktzeh object landed on the cloak, it's like the cloak becomes a vessel beneath the muktzeh object, and it acquires the status of the muktzeh object. Now the cloak is muktzeh, and Rabbi Asi did not move the cloak for that reason. So the people looking on said, well, Rabbi Yochanan must have held, like Rabbi Yehuda, that there is muktzeh because his disciple, Rabbi Asi, would not move his cloak when the candelabrum landed on it. The people who heard this conclusion said, what are you talking about? You can't conclude that Rabbi Yochanan holds by muktzeh just because a candelabrum landed on his disciple's cloak, and the disciple wouldn't move the cloak. Why can you not make that conclusion? Because the candelabrum has its very own specific rules that we don't extend necessarily to other objects. The candelabrum is a special case. There's a rule just for candelabras which says if you can move the candelabrum with one hand, so it's not muktzeh, right? A candelabrum that can be moved with one hand, it's like this candlestick. It doesn't get repugnant. It's valuable, but it's not so valuable that it's muktzeh because of being such a delicate, expensive object. So a candelabrum that can be moved with one hand is not muktzeh, and the fact is not muktzeh. But a candelabrum that requires two hands to move it is muktzeh. Why? Because if it's that big that it takes two hands to move it, so then it is considered to be part of the house. And just as you wouldn't start deconstructing your house, you wouldn't pull bricks out of the wall on Shabbos, because then you'd be violating the prohibition on construction, right? Demolition is part of construction. Demolition is a forbidden labor because you can't build things on Shabbos. And because you can't build things, you also can't take things apart. So a heavy candelabrum is considered part of the house. And the fact that it fell doesn't tell us necessarily that Rabbi Asi or his master, Rabbi Yochanan, hold by Muktzeh, because there's other factors in play with a candelabrum. Moreover, continuing the special rules of the candelabrum, if the candelabrum has joints, meaning it is assembled from several pieces. Now you can almost start to think like an erector set, right? Or well, this is an object that I use as a lap desk or as a standing desk here, right? But you can see it has joints. It comes apart. It shouldn't fall apart, right? Because I move this thing like this. But the fact is, it's made out of a few different pieces. If a candelabrum is made that way, then it's muktzeh. We're not allowed to move it. Why? Because it might fall apart and then we might come to put it back together, right? If it has the possibility, the genuine, common possibility, that if you move this thing that has a bunch of joints in it, then whether it's large or small, we're concerned that you might, it's not that it's muktzeh. We just don't want you to move it because we're afraid that it will fall apart and you will come to repair it, to put it back together. And so for that special reason, we say if a candelabrum has joints, you can't touch it on Shabbos. And not only that, but if a candelabrum has grooves so that it looks like the kind of fancy candelabrum that is made out of independent pieces, then even though it's actually made out of one piece, you still can't move it because it looks like the kind of candelabrum that would fall apart and come into pieces. And somebody might see you moving that and think, oh, I guess we can move candelabras that have joints because I just saw so-and-so move a candelabrum that has joints in it. So we don't move a candelabrum that has joints because it could fall apart, nor one that looks like it has joints and it might fall apart. Because there are special rules for the candelabrum, we don't know. The sages who watched Rabbi Asi leave his cloak on the floor with a candelabrum on it, we don't know if his master, Rabbi Yochanan, holds by the principle of Muktzeh, like Rabbi Yehuda, or doesn't hold by the principle of Muktzeh, like Rabbi Shimon. And that's where we are at the end of page 45. Perhaps we'll find out when we move into page 46 with God's help tomorrow. Does Rabbi Yochanan hold like Rabbi Yehuda or like Rabbi Shimon in terms of Muktzeh? That's what I've got for us today. I will just check over here to see comments or questions. Hello, Paul from Minneapolis. Nancy said, thank you for telling your grandfather's story. You're very welcome. If you're coming in late, tonight is Yom HaShoah, and today's teaching is dedicated to the memory of my grandfather, Imre. May his neshama, his soul, have a great aliyah, a great elevation in the world to come. And so we lit a memorial candle for him. It's not his yahrzeit now, but we can light a memorial candle in honor of him and all the 6 million who perished in the Shoah, the Holocaust. Just looking if there are any other questions. Fred Reher says, I make a great shakshuka. All the talk about food is making me hungry. Fred, why are you bringing up shakshuka? It's funny you're doing that because I have committed to learn how to make shakshuka. And I haven't got around to doing it yet, and I'm a little embarrassed about that because I told Nina and the kids that I would learn how to make shakshuka because we love shakshuka. It can't be that hard to learn how to make it. So I'm looking forward to learning how to make it. I'm making it. I'm definitely on that train. I just haven't done it yet, much to my embarrassment. Okay, I don't see any other questions. That is what I have for us today. We covered pages 44 and 45. And in terms of our takeaway, we see how important this idea of, it's two related ideas. First, what was a person's intent? What is a person's intent as he goes into Shabbos? In terms of like a certain object that doesn't have any clear use on Shabbos, right? If he designates that he's going to use it on Shabbos for a permitted reason, okay, then it won't be Muktzeh. But if he doesn't stipulate, then we're going to just assume that he acts like most people, right? What is a reasonable expectation that we could attribute to one individual like the population? And so we see, in terms of like Torah laws and biblical laws, and I mean rabbinic laws, they're not like the laws of the United States. Although, in terms of the criminal law, certainly intent matters. God forbid, somebody was killed if the person, did it by accident versus with intentionality. Obviously, there, the intent, the mens rea, comes to bear. But there's just more nuance with regard to what is a person thinking when we're talking about halakha, when we're talking about religious law, and how and whether or not he, observing Shabbos properly can depend on a person's intent. And we're going to see that over and over again. What was a person's specific intent? And if he didn't make that stipulation, what can we assume his intent was, given what the normal intent is of the vast majority of people? That's where we are. And what is this? Lynn says, the intent in Muktzeh used to set things aside is something I had not heard before. So there you go. There's a lot of nuance to Muktzeh. Listening to what I've taught, you're not ready. Just with what I've shared you, good introduction to Muktzeh, but you can't, you don't know enough to just make rulings. So if you have a question about something, whether it's Muktzeh or not, and it's during Shabbos and you can't look it up, so be stringent and say, unless I really, really need to move that thing or really need to use that thing, I'm not sure, so I'm just going to not use it. And then after Shabbos, look it up. Was that actually a Muktzeh situation or not? These rules are complicated, but at least we've now got an introduction going into how they work. My holy brothers and sisters, with God's help, we'll continue tomorrow with page 46 of Tractate Shabbos. All the best.